This revenge story contains intense acts of retribution that may be excessive and could be disturbing to some viewers.
The digital clock on my laptop glared 6:47 p.m., a mocking reminder of the time ticking away, each second a step closer to a truth I desperately didn't want to face. Outside, the world was being swallowed by a relentless blizzard, fat snowflakes battering against the window pane like a furious fist, the storm mirroring the tempest brewing inside me. The stale air in the house, usually a comforting familiarity, now felt like a suffocating shroud. This wasn't just the quiet of an empty house. It was the silence before a devastating revelation, the calm before a storm that would shatter everything I thought I knew. Wendy was at her yoga class. Again. The third time this week, a flimsy excuse that had begun to grate on my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. My fingers trembled over the keyboard, the keys feeling foreign and accusatory, as I faced a choice that would forever alter the course of my life. I hadn't meant to check her emails, but the whispers of unease, the subtle shifts in her behavior, had become a deafening roar in my mind, and the truth, like a dormant volcano, was about to explode. Trust had been the foundation of our marriage, a fragile edifice built on shared smiles and whispered promises, or so I had naively believed. But the cracks had started to appear. The late nights, the furtive glances at her phone, the hushed tones that ceased abruptly when I entered the room, the sudden and inexplicable password changes, all like pieces of a grotesque puzzle slowly forming a horrifying picture. I'd tried to ignore them, to brush them aside as paranoia, to hold on to the illusion of our perfect life. But tonight, I knew the facade would crumble. The first email, a seemingly innocuous meeting confirmed for Thursday, was a deceptive gateway to a world of lies, like the calm surface of a lake hiding a monstrous creature beneath. It was a simple message, but the weight of my suspicion gave it the potency of a venomous snake. As I scrolled deeper, each line of text was a stab to my heart, each word a burning acid that corroded the bonds of my marriage. Pictures, messages, plans, each a revelation of a secret life, a hidden world where I was merely an obstacle, an inconvenience to be eliminated. There he was, this overweight, balding joke of a man from her office, a grotesque figure who had become the object of my wife's affections. It was a betrayal so profound that it felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me, making me question everything that I held dear. Their exchanges grew more intimate with each scroll, more detailed, more devastating, painting a picture of a clandestine affair that had blossomed under my unsuspecting gaze, all while I was foolishly, blindly in love with her. Wendy's coffee mug sat untouched on my desk, a stark reminder of the morning's pretense. The crimson lipstick stain on its rim a silent taunt, a symbol of her infidelity and deceit. 5 years, reduced to a digital trail of broken vows and shattered dreams. I clenched my jaw, the muscles in my face tightening, the pain a stark contrast to the numbness that was creeping through my body as I read their latest exchange, a casual reference to my own death. "The insurance policy is set," she had typed, her words laced with cold indifference, as if discussing grocery lists or household chores. "Once it's done, we'll have everything we need." The coldness of her words sent a chill down my spine, the casualness of her cruelty a terrifying revelation. His reply was short, a chillingly casual agreement that sent shivers down my spine. 2 months, baby. Just 2 more months of playing nice, and we'll be rid of him forever. The casualness of his language, the sheer audacity of their plan, ignited a rage within me, a primal fury that threatened to consume me. The house creaked again, the sound amplified by the howling wind outside. And for a moment, I thought I saw them, the ghostly figures of my betrayal, standing in the doorway. I jerked my head up, my heart pounding in my chest. But I was alone, utterly alone with the knowledge of their betrayal, the chilling certainty that my wife and her lover were plotting my death. The family photos on the wall seemed to mock me now, their smiling faces a cruel reminder of a life that had never been real, of a love that had always been a lie. Would I ever look at these photos the same way again? My hand slammed against the desk, the force of my anger reverberating through the room, the coffee mug jumping and spilling its cold contents across the polished surface. The pain in my knuckles was a distant hum against the raging storm inside me, a dull ache against the sharp sting of betrayal. The rage, however, was very real, a consuming fire that threatened to engulf me. And with that realization came another, darker one. I wouldn't be a victim. I wouldn't simply let them destroy me. The question was, how would I make them pay? I pulled up their previous emails, my hands moving with a new, cold purpose. I would document every detail, every plan, every single word that had conspired against me. They thought they were clever, but I was now smarter, more cunning, and I would ensure that their arrogance would be their downfall. The snow falling outside, the storm raging against the walls, felt like a fitting backdrop to the coming storm within me. Tonight, they would learn there were consequences for betrayal, and the price, I would ensure, would be steep. The soft sound of a car door slamming outside, muffled by the heavy snow, snapped me back to reality. My eyes darted to the window, peering through the falling snow, catching a fleeting glimpse of our neighbor's SUV pulling away. Not her, not yet. They were still out there, plotting, scheming, thinking they had the upper hand. But I had time to prepare, time to even the odds. My hands moved mechanically across the keyboard, forwarding copies of the emails to my secure account. Each click seemed to mark the death of another belief I'd held, echoing through the silent house. Love, trust, future. All of it poisoned by their greed. All of it rendered meaningless. Evening was deepening, and my reflection in the laptop's pale blue glow showed me a ghost of the man I'd been this morning. The man who'd kissed his wife goodbye, told her to have a good day, believed in happy endings. That man was gone now, buried under the weight of their treachery. The final email in the chain made my stomach churn. It was from him. "I know a guy," he had written, the casualness of his words making my stomach clench. "Makes it look like an accident. Clean, simple, untraceable. Your loving husband takes a tragic fall, and we cash in. Poetry, baby." He even dared to use pet names with her, to act as if I meant absolutely nothing. Her response was cold and calculated, betraying no emotion whatsoever, as if discussing the weather. "Do it. I can't wait to start our life together. Ross never understood me like you do." A bitter laugh escaped my throat, harsh and foreign. 5 years of marriage, and I'd never truly known her. The woman I'd built my life around, shared my dreams with, was nothing but a carefully constructed lie. She was a stranger, a cold and calculating stranger, and I had been her unsuspecting victim. The coffee mug still sat there, her lipstick stain a crimson accusation, a taunt that mocked me with its silent declaration of her infidelity. With a swift motion, I grabbed it and hurled it against the wall. The crash was satisfying, coffee streaming down the cream-colored paint like dark tears, like the tears I couldn't let myself shed. "Never understood you?" I whispered to the empty room, my voice low and menacing, barely above a growl. "Oh, Wendy, I understand you now, better than you think." My mind was already racing, planning, calculating. They thought they were the predators in this game, They had no idea what they'd awakened in me. The rage inside had begun to crystallize into something cold and sharp, a weapon I would wield with surgical precision. The betrayal had transformed me into something I never thought I could be. Something dangerous, something determined. I pulled up a new browser window and started my research. If they wanted to play with death, I'd teach them the rules of the game. They would learn the true cost of betrayal, and the price they would pay would be astronomical. And when it was over, when their perfect little plan lay in ruins around them, they'd understand exactly who they'd tried to destroy. The storm raging outside felt like an omen, mirroring the tempest that was brewing within me. The house felt different now, transformed from a haven into a battleground. But I was ready. The hunt was about to begin, and this time, I would be the one laying the trap. I would be the one waiting in the darkness, ready to strike. The heavy snowfall outside served as a strange comfort, a quiet accomplice to my plans. At 3 a.m., I sat hunched over my workbench in the garage, the harsh, unwavering glow of my laptop casting long, distorted shadows across the cluttered space. The garage had become my sanctuary, my fortress of solitude, and my war room. 2 weeks had passed since I'd stumbled upon their treachery. 2 weeks of relentless research, planning, and meticulous preparation. The once familiar space now bore the marks of my transformation. The walls plastered with printouts of their damning emails. The lines of text connected by red strings like a deranged detective's murder board. Except in this case, I wasn't solving a crime. I was planning the perfect counterattack. The snow outside had stopped, for the moment at least. But the temperature had plummeted, and the garage was freezing. Every breath I took was visible in the frigid air. I clicked through another weapons forum, my eyes burning from hours of staring at the screen, the blue light reflecting off the pale, drawn skin under my eyes. I felt like a ghost, a hollow shell of my former self, driven by an all-consuming need for justice. The slingshot, purchased online using a prepaid card and a fake name, had arrived yesterday, a professional-grade model, far more powerful than the toys kids play with. My fingers traced its polished metal frame, testing the draw weight, getting a sense of its power. With the right ammunition, it could deliver a devastating blow. Each detail, each component of my plan, had been carefully considered. The gas mask, an industrial-grade model capable of filtering out even the most caustic fumes, sat on the bench beside me, its filters gleaming dully in the artificial light. I'd paid cash for it at a surplus store 2 towns over, using a different alias. The clerk hadn't even looked twice at me. Why would he? I looked like what I was, just another normal guy. Someone you'd pass on the street without a second glance. Someone who could disappear into a crowd without causing so much as a second look. But beneath the surface, I was a different person. A force of nature brewing under the guise of a normal human being. My phone buzzed, vibrating softly against the cold metal of the workbench. It was a text from Wendy. "Working late again, honey. Don't wait up." I smiled grimly at the message, the corners of my mouth turning down in a mirthless sneer. She thought I was still the same trusting fool, probably assumed I was already in bed, blissfully ignorant, worrying about her. She likely imagined me curled up under the blankets, wondering when she'd return. Instead, I was here, surrounded by the tools of her destruction, planning every detail with a cold, calculating precision. A sense of dark satisfaction washed over me. The bottle of concentrated ammonia, the final piece of the puzzle, was safely secured in a locked cabinet away from the house, away from any prying eyes. It was industrial strength, 28% concentration, enough to cause severe respiratory distress, especially in an enclosed space. I had memorized the chemical properties, the exposure limits, and the likely physiological effects. I'd pored over online databases, scientific articles, even emergency response protocols, absorbing every detail, every piece of knowledge I could find. Knowledge was power, and I intended to use every bit of it. The same knowledge they'd used against me, I'd use against them tenfold. My hands moved automatically, loading the slingshot with a practice round. The rubber band stretched smoothly, the familiar tension grounding me in the moment. I'd been practicing for hours each night, honing my aim, understanding the weapon's quirks, pushing myself to the limits of my skill. The satisfying thunk of the projectile hitting its target echoed through the garage, a hollow sound that resonated with the emptiness in my soul. Across the room, dozens of perfect holes dotted the practice target, each mark representing a potential strike point, carefully calculated for maximum impact. The sound of rubber snapping back into place had become a sort of meditation, a rhythm that kept the rage focused and cold, ensuring that I wouldn't make a single misstep. It was a way to channel my grief, my anger, my desire for revenge, transforming them into a calculated weapon. As I reloaded, my wedding ring, which I had stopped wearing days ago, glinted in the cold light. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, not yet. It sat on the workbench now, a silent witness to my preparations, a haunting reminder of everything that had been lost. It was a physical manifestation of broken promises, shattered dreams, and a love that had never been real. "You should have just asked for a divorce," I muttered under my breath, firing another shot. Direct hit, center mass. "But you had to get greedy, didn't you, Wendy?" The words came out as a venomous whisper, laced with a bitterness that surprised even me. The memory of her smile, once so precious, now twisted something inside me, a sharp, visceral pain that cut deep. How many times had she kissed me goodbye, knowing she was planning my death? How many nights had she lain beside me, her body warm against mine, dreaming of her new life with that pathetic excuse for a man? I logged into our bank account, checking the insurance policy details one more time. $2 million. That's what my life was worth to them. The numbers on the screen seemed to accuse me with their cold, digital glow. They'd added the policy 6 months ago, right around the time their affair had started, right around the time they had started seeing each other, right around the time that they had deemed me expendable. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Nothing they did was a coincidence, and I was beginning to see their plans for what they were: cold, calculated, and cruel. I logged into our bank account, checking the insurance policy details one more time. $2 million. That's what my life was worth to them. The numbers on the screen seemed to accuse me with their cold, digital glow. They'd added the policy 6 months ago, right around the time their affair had started, right around the time they had started seeing each other, right around the time that they had deemed me expendable. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Nothing they did was a coincidence, and I was beginning to see their plans for what they were: cold, calculated, and cruel. Everything was ready. The tools were prepared, the plan memorized, the timing calculated. All that remained was to wait for their move. They thought they were the hunters, but they had no idea what was waiting for them. They had no idea that I wasn't the same person they had schemed against. In their arrogance, they'd created their own nightmare. They'd awakened a force that they would soon find out they would not be able to contend with. I packed away the equipment with methodical care, each item in its designated place. The garage would look normal to anyone else, just another suburban workspace, filled with tools and junk. But beneath the ordinary surface lay the instruments of justice, waiting to be unleashed. A silent promise of what was to come, hidden in plain sight. Tomorrow, I would play the loving husband one last time. And then, when the moment was right, they would learn the true meaning of betrayal. They would see that they had underestimated me, that I was far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. I could almost taste the victory. It was darker than usual outside, the heavy cloud cover blocking out any trace of moonlight. Perfect, I thought, as I stood in the shadows of my living room, watching the street through a narrow gap in the curtains. 11:42 p.m. They would be here soon. My heart pounded in my chest, but my hands remained steady, my breathing calm and controlled. The weeks of planning had transformed me from a victim into a predator, and I was ready to stalk my prey. Everything was in position, every detail accounted for, every contingency planned. The gas mask hung ready at my belt, the straps adjusted for quick deployment, its presence a constant reminder of the danger and the meticulousness of my plans. The modified slingshot, loaded with the ammonia bottle, weighted in my hands, the weight of it reassuring and deadly. I'd reinforced the bottle with multiple layers of impact-resistant tape, making sure it wouldn't shatter prematurely. It needed to break on target, and on target alone. I had spent hours making sure that it would. My phone vibrated quietly, the screen lighting up with a new text from Wendy. Still at Jennifer's. Might crash here tonight. Jennifer's. Right, that was their code. I knew it well. I had seen it in their emails, read it repeatedly. When she said Jennifer's, she meant she was with him, with that pathetic excuse of a man plotting my demise. How convenient that tonight was their chosen night, their carefully planned execution of their betrayal. The cold calculation of their actions turned my stomach and fueled the fire of my anger. A car's headlights swept across the house, briefly illuminating the snow-covered yard, then quickly died as it pulled into the alley. My pulse quickened, but my hands remained steady, my mind focused. The familiar crunch of gravel under tires came from the back alley. They were using his car, just as planned. Amateurs. They thought the darkness would hide them, that the snow would be an accomplice. But I knew every approach to my house, had calculated every angle, every possible scenario. I had prepared for this. And tonight was the night. I moved silently to my position near the kitchen, my bare feet making no sound on the hardwood floor. The back door was their likely entry point. I deliberately left the security light burnt out last week, creating the perfect blind spot, a gaping hole in their plan, a black space where they wouldn't be able to see the danger that was waiting for them. The darkness was my ally, a cloak that shielded me from their prying eyes. I adjusted my grip on the slingshot, feeling the cold ammonia bottle against my palm, its presence both comforting and sinister. Footsteps on the back porch, muffled by the snow. Two sets, one heavy and clumsy, his footsteps loud and awkward as always, the other light and familiar, her gait as deceitful as her soul. A metallic scraping at the lock, the sound sharp and distinct in the quiet of the night. They were actually picking it, like common burglars, their actions so blatantly wrong, so disrespectful. The irony would have made me laugh if I weren't so focused, so intent on the task at hand. They were so pathetic, so predictable. I could hear their whispered conversation through the thin door, their hushed tones filled with anticipation and greed. I strained to hear each word, each syllable, absorbing their final moments before their world came crashing down around them. "Hurry up," Wendy's voice, tense with anticipation, impatient to get this over with, to take my life so she could move on to the next one. "Almost got it," his response, breathless and excited, the sound of a dog panting at the door, his eagerness so transparent that it made me want to vomit. "You are sure he's asleep?" dead to the world by now. He never checks the house at night. She said this with such confidence, so sure of her plans, so cocky in her deceit, that it made my blood boil. It also made me smile. Dear wife, you couldn't be more wrong. You underestimated me, just like he did. I shifted my weight, the gas mask heavy against my hip, the weight of its purpose a constant reminder of what I had to do. The lock clicked softly, a small sound that signaled the start of my performance. Showtime. The door eased open with a faint creak, the sound of betrayal echoing through the silence of the house. A beam of flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping across my kitchen floor, slicing through the shadows. His silhouette appeared first, bulky, awkward, filling the doorframe with his pathetic frame. The baseball cap sat crooked on his balding head, a sad, pathetic excuse of a man. Behind him, Wendy's slender figure, her blonde hair gleaming faintly in the dim light, a cruel angel of death waiting to claim me as her victim. I waited, counting their steps, a slow, deliberate count that focused my mind, that channeled the rage that coursed through my veins. 1, 2, 3. They needed to be fully inside, committed to their action, with no turning back. The flashlight beam swung toward the living room, the light revealing the outline of my couch, my family photos, all things I held dear, all things they wanted to destroy. Perfect. The bedroom's upstairs, Wendy whispered, her voice betraying a hint of nervousness, a crack in her cold facade. We should. The rest of her sentence was lost as I released the slingshot. The bottle arced through the darkness, a black silhouette against the faint light. My hours of practice paying off in one perfect shot. It struck the man I had come to despise directly in the face, shattering on impact, creating a small explosion of toxic fumes. The effect was instantaneous, just as I had predicted. The ammonia fumes burst outward in a caustic cloud, the smell acrid and overwhelming. His scream was cut short by desperate choking, a gurgling sound that filled the kitchen with terror. I slipped on the gas mask in one practiced motion, the sealed environment letting me watch their panic with clinical detachment, the clear plastic reflecting their agony. What's happening? Wendy's voice rose in hysteria as she stumbled backward, colliding with the kitchen counter. I can't breathe. The jerk was already staggering toward the back door, his survival instinct kicking in despite the burning in his lungs. Perfect, exactly as I'd planned. The bitter cold and heavy snow would finish what the ammonia had started. I watched through my mask as he stumbled out into the blizzard, his movements becoming more erratic with each step. A sudden banging from next door made me jump. Through the swirling snow, I could make out Mrs. Peterson's silhouette in her window. That nosy old bat was probably already reaching for her phone, though given her history of crying wolf over every little disturbance, the police wouldn't exactly rush over here in this weather. She'd called them 3 times last month alone, once about teenagers walking too loudly, again about a car alarm 2 blocks away, and most recently about a suspicious shadow that turned out to be a garbage can. I moved quickly, implementing the next phase of my plan. Opening the windows, let the frigid air rush in, helping to dissipate the ammonia fumes. The snowfall would help too, absorbing and diluting the chemical traces. I had researched this extensively. Ammonia's high solubility in water made snow nature's own cleaning service. Wendy was still huddled in the corner, gasping and sobbing. The exposure hadn't been as direct for her, just as I'd calculated. She would live to face the consequences of her betrayal. Through the open door, I could barely make out the jerk's dark form, stumbling blindly through the deepening snow, growing weaker with each step. The blizzard was intensifying, the wind howling like a hungry beast. He wouldn't survive the night, Between the chemical burns in his lungs and the lethal cold, his fate was sealed. "Why?" Wendy choked out between sobs, her voice raw and broken. "How did you?" "Your emails weren't as private as you thought," I replied coldly, my voice muffled by the mask. "Next time you plot someone's murder, maybe use better passwords." I kept working methodically, using the snow from outside to dilute any ammonia residue, carefully removing all traces of my preparation. The gas mask would need to be disposed of too. I'd already prepared a spot for it deep in the woods behind the subdivision. By morning, the snow would cover my tracks. Mrs. Peterson's lights were still on, and I could see her gesturing animatedly on the phone. Let her call. By the time anyone responded to her latest emergency in this weather, nature would have erased most of the evidence, and given her reputation, they'd probably wait until morning anyway. The house creaked and groaned under the assault of the wind, the temperature dropping rapidly through the open windows. Perfect conditions for my story. A break-in gone wrong. An intruder fleeing into the storm. A tragic accident. The truth would be buried under layers of snow and ice, just like the jerk's body would be, somewhere out there in the white wasteland. I looked at Wendy, still curled up and whimpering on the floor. "I'll call an ambulance," I said, making sure my voice carried the right mix of concern and confusion. "Just hold on." The performance was beginning, and I had my role memorized perfectly. By the time help arrived, I would be nothing more than a shocked husband, a victim of a break-in, completely innocent of the tragedy unfolding in the storm. The blizzard raged on outside, nature becoming an unwitting accomplice in my revenge. Somewhere out there, the jerk was facing his final moments, and the snow would keep my secrets until spring. But even as I played my part, a nagging thought tugged at the back of my mind. When the snow melted, what other secrets might it reveal? The next few hours passed in a blur of calculated movements and careful preparation. The blizzard had intensified, turning the world outside into a white void. The temperature had plummeted well below freezing, the kind of bitter cold that could kill in minutes. Perfect conditions for what I needed to do. I worked methodically, my movements precise despite the freezing air still flowing through the open windows. Every trace of ammonia needed to be diluted and dispersed. The snow proved to be an excellent tool. I used it to clean surfaces, letting the chemical dissolve into the pristine white powder before disposing of it outside. The wind would take care of the rest, scattering any remaining evidence across the neighborhood. Wendy had finally passed out, her body giving in to the shock and chemical exposure. I'd positioned her carefully in the living room, away from the worst of the contamination. She would survive. That was part of the plan. Her mental state, however, was already fragmenting. Between the trauma and the chemical exposure, her credibility would be shot. Who would believe her confused ramblings about murder plots and revenge? Mrs. Peterson's lights were still on across the street, her silhouette pacing back and forth behind her curtains. I could imagine her frantic calls to the police, describing the disturbance in her typically dramatic fashion. I heard screaming, and a man running into the storm. Something terrible is happening at the Wilson house. But given her history of false alarms, the suspicious mailman last week, the dangerous kids playing basketball too late, her calls would likely be low priority, especially in this weather. The dispatcher would probably file it away with her other hysterical reports. The time she swore there was a burglar that turned out to be a wind-blown trash can, or the gang activity. That was actually a group of retirees power walking. I moved through the house like a ghost, eliminating every trace of my preparation. The gas mask was already sealed in a waterproof bag, ready to be buried deep in the woods where the spring thaw wouldn't reveal it. My research notes, the evidence of my meticulous planning, had been destroyed days ago. The slingshot would be cleaned and returned to its innocent place among my sporting equipment, just another hobby item, nothing suspicious about it. The ammonia bottle had shattered perfectly, leaving no distinctive pieces that could be traced. What remained would be diluted beyond recognition by morning. The snow was my accomplice now, each falling flake helping to erase what had happened here. Around 3 a.m., I finally called 911 myself. My voice was perfectly calibrated, confused, frightened, but not panicked. Someone broke into my house. My wife is hurt. There was some kind of chemical smell. Please, we need help. The dispatcher's response was exactly what I'd anticipated. Sir, we have a unit responding to your area, but the weather is making travel difficult. Is your wife breathing? Are you in immediate danger? Yes, she's breathing, but she's not conscious, I replied, adding just the right tremor to my voice. The intruder ran out into the storm. I think I recognize him. He works with my wife. Please hurry. Sir, stay on the line. Emergency services are having trouble with the road conditions. It might be a while before they can reach you safely. Perfect. Every minute of delay was another layer of snow covering my tracks, another degree of temperature dropping, ensuring the jerk's fate out there in the wilderness of white. The storm was forecast to continue until morning. By then, nature would have done most of my cleanup work for me. I kept the dispatcher talking, playing my role flawlessly. Yes, I'd opened windows to clear the chemical smell. Yes, I'd tried to help my wife. No, I hadn't followed the intruder. It was too dangerous in this weather. Every answer was carefully crafted to support the narrative I'd constructed. Through the windows, the world had disappeared into a swirling white void. Somewhere out there, the jerk was facing his final moments, if he hadn't succumbed already. The cold would be unbearable, especially with his chemical burns and damaged lungs. He'd be disoriented, stumbling blindly through the storm. Perhaps he'd already collapsed, letting the snow gradually cover him in a white shroud. By the time they found him, the evidence would be corrupted by exposure and frost damage. His death would be attributed to the elements, a tragic end to a botched burglary attempt. The sound of distant sirens finally cut through the howling wind around dawn. By then, everything was prepared. The house had aired out, the chemical traces diluted and dispersed. Wendy was still unconscious, but breathing steadily. The story was set. A break-in gone wrong, a panicked escape into the storm, a concerned husband doing his best in a crisis. As red and blue lights finally painted the snow-covered yard in alternating colors, I allowed myself a grim smile. The storm had been an unexpected ally, but I wasn't foolish enough to think this was over. Spring would come eventually, and melting snow had a way of revealing secrets. But that was a problem for another day. For now, I had a performance to deliver, and the first responders would be my audience. I opened the door to greet them, letting the bitter cold rush in one last time. "Thank God you are here," I called out, watching them struggle through the deep snow. "Please, help my wife." The investigation was about to begin, but thanks to the storm, its course was already set. Nature itself had conspired to help conceal my revenge, but for how long? Only the melting snow would tell. 3 days after the incident, the storm had finally passed. The world outside my window was buried under 4 feet of snow. The neighborhood transformed into an alien landscape of white mounds and blue shadows. The police had come and gone several times, their initial investigation cursory at best. Mrs. Peterson's reputation for crying wolf had worked in my favor. They'd practically apologized for bothering me at all. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping coffee and watching the news. The local station was running another story about the dangers of the recent blizzard, complete with statistics about hypothermia and warnings about exposure. I wondered if they'd be running a different kind of story soon. My phone buzzed. Another message from the detective assigned to the case. They'd found his car in the back alley, now just a snow-covered lump. No signs of the jerk yet, but they weren't looking very hard. Just another case of a burglar fleeing into a storm, they thought. Natural selection at work. Wendy was still in the hospital, heavily sedated. The doctors called it acute stress disorder, triggered by the break-in. Her few coherent moments were filled with fractured accusations and confused ramblings about murder plots and revenge. The medical staff attributed it to the trauma and possible chemical exposure from what they assumed was some industrial cleaner the burglar had spilled. Her credibility was shot. Her mind a jumble of paranoid delusions, exactly as I'd planned. But something felt off. The victory I'd anticipated was hollow, tainted by an undercurrent of anxiety that I couldn't shake. Every passing snowplow made me tense. Every phone call could be the call. The snow wouldn't last forever. It happened on the fourth day. A kid's dog, digging in a snowbank 3 blocks away, found him. I watched from my window as the police cars arrived, their lights cutting through the morning mist. The body was frozen solid, they said, curled up like he was sleeping. The cause of death seemed obvious: exposure, hypothermia, the deadly storm claiming another victim. But there were complications. The medical examiner found some unusual damage to his respiratory system. The detective told me later that day, his eyes studying my face. Chemical burns, possibly. Hard to distinguish from frost damage, though. Strange coincidence, given your wife's statements about a chemical spill during the break-in. I played my part perfectly. God, that's horrible, I said, letting just the right amount of shock color my voice. Do you think he brought something with him when he broke in? Some kind of chemical? The detective shrugged, but I caught the slight narrowing of his eyes. Hard to say. The storm really complicated things. Evidence gets corrupted, tracks get covered, chemicals get diluted. Makes our job interesting. Wendy's condition deteriorated after they told her about the jerk's death. She became completely untethered from reality, her mind unable to process the truth of what had happened. The doctors talked about long-term care, about trauma and psychosis. Her parents blamed me, of course, not for his death, but for not protecting her, for somehow letting this happen. If they only knew. The investigation continued, but without direction. The official theory was simple enough. A man breaks into a house, spills some chemical he brought with him, flees into a blizzard, and succumbs to the elements. Tragic, but straightforward. The chemical burns? Probably from whatever he was carrying. The timeline? Corrupted by the storm and unreliable witnesses. The motive? A simple burglary gone wrong. But I could feel it unraveling at the edges. Every time the temperature rose above freezing, my anxiety spiked. The snow was melting, bit by bit, revealing things that had been hidden. A local kid found the remains of a shattered bottle, the glass frosted and strange. An elderly couple reported their dog getting sick after digging in a particular snowbank. The snow there tainted with an odd smell. The detective kept coming back, each visit wrapped in a thin veneer of routine follow-up. But his questions were becoming more pointed, his eyes more suspicious. He'd pulled the jerk's phone records, found the connection to Wendy. Discovery of the affair was inevitable. It would provide a twist to their investigation, but not necessarily the truth. Still, it was one more thread that could unravel everything. I maintained my routine, played the concerned husband, the confused victim. But each day brought new anxieties. Had I really disposed of everything? Would the gas mask remain hidden through the spring thaw? Had I been as thorough as I thought? Or had the snow preserved some damning piece of evidence, waiting to be revealed? The answer would come with spring, I knew. When the last snow melted, when the ground thawed, when nature gave up its secrets, My revenge had been calculated, precise, seemingly perfect. But as I watched another snowplow clear the street, revealing the asphalt beneath the white blanket, I wondered if I had merely postponed the inevitable. The snow had been both blessing and curse, concealing my crime but also preserving it, like a time capsule waiting to be opened. My victory felt incomplete, tainted by the knowledge that every warm day brought new possibilities for discovery. I caught my reflection in the window, a ghost of my former self, transformed by revenge into something I barely recognized. I had won, yes. The jerk was dead. Wendy was lost in her own mind, and I was free. But the cost had been higher than I'd calculated, and the final bill might not yet be paid. Outside, the snow continued to melt, dripping like tears from the eaves of my house. Each drop was a reminder that time was passing, that seasons change, that nothing stays buried forever. Spring was coming, and with it, the possibility that my perfect revenge might prove to be anything but perfect.